Chapter 11 The Admirable Choice. The next day in the mill, the noise was just as jarring, and her feet in Tryphina's old boots swelled just as large. But now and again she caught herself humming. Why am I suddenly happy? What wonderful thing is about to happen to me? And then she remembered. Tonight, after supper, Betsy would read to her again. She was, of course, afraid for Oliver, who was all mixed up in her mind with Charlie. But there was a delicious anticipation, like molded sugar on her tongue. She had to know what would happen to him, how his story would unfold. Diana noticed the change. "You're settling in faster than I thought," she said. But Lyddie didn't tell her. She didn't quite know how to explain to anyone that it wasn't so much that she had gotten used to the mill, but she had found a way to escape its grasp. The pasted sheets of poetry or scripture in the window frames, the geraniums on the sill, those must be some other girl's way, she decided. But hers was a story. As the days melted into weeks, she tried not to think how very kind it was of Betsy to keep reading to her. There were nights, of course, when she could not, when there was shopping or washing that had to be done. On Saturday evenings they were let out 2 hours early, and Amelia corralled Lyddie and Prudence for long walks along the river before it grew too dark. Betsy, of course, did whatever she liked regardless of Amelia. Sundays Amelia dragged the reluctant Lyddie to church. At first, Lyddie had been afraid Betsy would go on reading without her, but Betsy waited until Sunday afternoon, when Amelia and Prudence were down in the dining room, writing their weekly letters home, and she picked up the story just where she had stopped on the previous Friday evening. It was several weeks before Lyddie caught on that the novel was from the lending library, and thus cost Betsy 5 cents a week to borrow. On her own, Betsy could have read it much faster, Lyddie was sure of that. As much as she hated to spend the money, on her first payday, Lyddie insisted on giving Betsy a full 10 cents to help with Oliver's rent. Betsy laughed, but she took it. She too was saving her money, she confessed quietly to Lyddie and asked her not to tell, to go for an education. There was a college out west in Ohio that took female students, a real college, not a young ladies' seminary. But don't tell Amelia, she said, her voice returning to its usual ironic tone. She'd think it unladylike to want to go to Oberlin. It seemed strange to Lyddie that Betsy should care at all what Amelia thought. But Lyddie, who had never had any ambition to be thought a lady, did find herself asking, what would Amelia think? And censoring her own behavior from time to time accordingly. Then, all too soon, the book was done. It seemed to have flown by, and there was so much, especially at the beginning, when Lyddie was too tired, and try as she might could not listen properly, so much at the beginning that she needed to hear again. Actually, she needed to hear the whole book again, even the terrible parts, dear Nancy's killing and the death of Sykes. She wished she dared to ask Betsy to read more, but she could not. Betsy had given her hours and hours of time and voice. Roommates were making plans for going home. And besides, with July nearly upon them, the 3 roommates were making plans for going home. The very word was like a blow to her chest. Home. If only she could go. But she had signed with the corporation for a full year of work. If she left, even just to see the cabin and visit for an hour or so with Charlie, she would lose her position. And if you leave without an honorable discharge, the clerk had said, not only will you never work at the Concord Corporation again, but no other mill in Lowell will ever engage you. Blacklisted. The word sent chills down her backbone. So she watched her roommates pack their trunks and listened as they chattered about whom they would see and what they would do, and tried not to mind. Amelia would go to New Hampshire with her clergyman father, where her clergyman father had a country church. Her mother would welcome her help around the manse, and with the tutoring of the farm children in the parish Sunday school. Prudence was bound for the family farm near Rutland, where, Amelia hinted, a suitor on a neighboring farm was primed to snatch her away from factory life forever. Betsy's parents were dead, but there was an uncle in Maine who was always glad for her to come and help with the cooking. Haying season would soon be here, and there would be many mouths to feed. There was a chance as well, Betsy said, of seeing her brother. But again, he might be too pressed with invitations from his university mates to find time for a visit with a sister who was only an old spinster and a factory girl to boot. After they are gone, I'll be earning and saving, Lyddie said to comfort herself. I may even earn more. If the weaving room is short of workers, Mr. Marsden may assign me another loom. Then I could turn out many more pieces each week. For she was proficient now. Weeks before, she had begun tending her own loom without Diana's help. She hadn't imagined that Diana would go on holiday as well, but when Diana told her she was going, she felt a little thrill. Mr. Marsden was sure to give her charge of at least 2 looms, perhaps a third. She didn't want Diana to think she was rejoicing in her absence, but she was not skilled at feigning feelings she did not own. I'll miss you, she said. Diana laughed at her. Oh, you'll be glad enough to see me gone, she said. There'll be 3 looms for you to tend, a nice fat raise to your wages for these several weeks. Lyddie blushed. You needn't feel bad. Enjoy the money. I think you'll find you've earned every penny. It's hot as Hades up here in July. But where will you be going? Lyddie asked, trying to shift attention from herself. She quickly repented, remembering too late that Diana had no family waiting to see her. It's all right, Diana said in reply to Lyddie's pained look. I was orphaned young. I'm used to it. I suppose this mill is as much home as I can claim. I started here as a doffer when I was 10, so I have 15 years here, but only a scant handful of Julys. Lyddie wanted to ask, then, if she had no home to go to where she was headed, but it wasn't rightly her business, and Diana didn't offer the information, except to say when the noise of the machines ensured that no one could overhear, there'll be a mass meeting at Woburn on Independence Day. When Lyddie looked puzzled, she went on, of the movement, the 10-hour movement. Miss Bagley will speak, as well as some of the men. When Lyddie still said nothing, she continued, there'll be a picnic lunch, a real 4th of July celebration. How about it? I promise no one will make you sign your name to anything. Lyddie pressed her lips together and shook her head. No, she said. I expect I'll be busy. July was hot, as Diana had so inelegantly predicted. Reluctantly, Lyddie spent $1 on a light summer work dress as her spring calico proved unbearable. Her other expenditure was at the lending library, where she borrowed Oliver Twist. This time she would read it on her own. It didn't occur to her that she was teaching herself, as she laboriously chopped apart the words that had rolled like rainwater off Betsy's tongue. She was so hungry to hear the story again, exhausted as she was after her 13 hours in the weaving room. She lay sweating across her bed, mouthing in whispers the sounds of Mr. Dickens' narrative. She was grateful to be alone in the room. There was no one there to make fun of her efforts, or even to try to help. She didn't want help. She didn't want to share this reading with anyone. She was determined to learn the book so well that she would be able to read it aloud to Charlie someday. And wouldn't he be surprised? His Lyddie a real scholar. He'd be monstrous proud. During the day at the looms, she went over in her head the bits of the story that she had puzzled out the night before. Then it occurred to her that she could copy out pages and paste them up and practice reading them whenever she had a pause. There was not a lot of pauses when she had 3 machines to tend, so she pasted the copied page on the frame of one of the looms where she could snatch a glance at it as she worked. July was halfway gone when she made her momentous decision. One fair evening, as soon as supper was done, she dressed in her calico, which was nicer than her light summer cotton, put on her bonnet and good boots, and went out on the street. She was trembling when she got to the door of the shop, but she pushed it open. A little bell rang as she did so, and a gentleman who was seated on a high stool behind a slanting desktop looked up at her over his spectacles. How may I help you, miss? He asked politely. She tried to control the shaking in her voice, but in the end was unable to. I come to purchase the book, she said. The gentleman slid off his stool and waited for her to continue. But Lyddie had already made her rehearsed speech. She didn't have any words more prepared. She didn't have any more words prepared. Finally, he leaned toward her and said in the kindliest sort of voice, "What book did you have in mind, my dear?" How stupid she must seem to him. The shop was nothing but shelves and shelves of books, hundreds, perhaps thousands of books. Oliver Twist, if you please, sir," she managed to stammer out. "Ah," he said, "Mr. Dickens, an admirable choice." He showed her several editions, some rudely printed on cheap paper with only paper backing, but there was only one she wanted. It was beautifully bound in leather with gold letters stamped on its spine. It would take all her money, she knew. Maybe it would be more than she had. She looked fearfully at the kind clerk. "That would be $2, he said. "Shall I wrap it for you?" She handed him $2 from her purse. "Yes," she said, sighing with relief. "Yes, thank you, sir." And clutching her treasure, she ran from the shop and would have run all the way back to the boarding house, except that she realized that people on the street were turning to stare. The Sundays of July were too precious to think of going to church. She didn't even go to the big Sunday school union picnic on the 4th, though the sound of the fireworks sent her running from her room to the kitchen. There was no one at home to explain the fearsome racket, but she satisfied herself that the iron cook stove had not blown up, and returned to her sweltering bedroom to continue reading and copying. Mrs. Bedloe gave a general reminder at breakfast on the third Sabbath that many of her boarders were neglecting divine worship, and that the corporation would be most vexed if attendance did not soon improve among the inhabitants of number 5. Lyddie slipped a copied page of her book into her pocket, and managed to read through the long Methodist sermon. In this way, she only lost a little study time during the 2-hour service. She was startled once into attention during the scripture reading. "Why do you, a Jew, ask water of me, a Samaritan?" the woman asked Jesus in the gospel story. Jesus, a Jew? Just like the wicked Fagin? No one had ever told her that Jesus was a Jew before. Just like Fagin, and yet not like Fagin at all. Lyddie studied on it as she walked home after the service. "Will you watch where you're going, please?" She had walked straight into a stout woman in her Sunday best. Lyddie murmured an apology, but the woman humphed angrily and readjusted her bonnet, mumbling something under her breath that ended in "factory girls." The sidewalk was too crowded for daydreaming. Lyddie packed her wonderings away in her head to think about some other time, and began to watch where she was going. It was then that she saw Diana, or thought she did. At any rate, she saw a couple, a handsome, bearded gentleman with a well-dressed lady on his arm, walking toward her on the opposite side of Merrimack Street. The woman was Diana, Lyddie was sure of it. Without thinking, Lyddie called out to her. But the woman turned her head away. Perhaps she was embarrassed to have a girl yelling rudely at her across a public thoroughfare. Then several carriages and a cart rolled past them, and before Lyddie could see them again, the man and woman had disappeared into the crowd of Sunday strollers. She must have been mistaken. Diana would have recognized her and come across to speak.